Hey guys, welcome back to the Summer of Ecclesiastes. As we move further, a little just kind of a point of contention, I guess you could say. We are going to spend a good bit of time in this series talking about sovereignty. You'll notice last time there was this little snippet at the very end where we talked about God's sovereignty. As we get into, I believe it's going to be lesson 11, we'll spend a good bit of time talking about God's sovereignty there. And if you look at the playlist, you'll see that there are several side notes that deal with God's sovereignty as well. We have to understand that as God preserved his word and as God acts in history, he's doing things for his own glory and really to get his own ends across. And so he's going to use various means to do this. He's going to use various methods to do this. And so we'll keep using certain illustrations over and over. But I wanted to address that because, again, we got into it at the very, very end, kind of the tail of last lesson. And now we're going to kind of divert into something completely different. But if you're still curious, if you're still kind of lost on that topic and how that plays together, we'll spend a good amount of time digging in as we get later on in this series. So just keep that in mind as you go. Now, the type of material that Solomon is writing is the type of material we call wisdom literature. Now, as we get into Ecclesiastes itself, here's like the first rule you have to remember when it comes to the type of literature it is. It is wisdom literature, which means it is not as set and hard and fast as something like the law would be. The law is straight up telling you what to do. Wisdom literature is telling you how things tend to work. That's where I think a lot of the confusion comes in, because Proverbs is so blatant about if you live this life, this is the result you get. And then when you look at Ecclesiastes, Solomon is basically looking at what he wrote in Proverbs going, yeah, but it doesn't always work that way. That's why, because it's wisdom literature. It's generally true, but there are some exceptions, and that's where God's sovereignty comes into play. That's why it's so important to remember that detail. Wisdom literature does not, pay attention to that. It does not teach a universally valid truth. Okay? Many are true only in a specific specific circumstance or at the right time or when God determines the timing. And so you need to understand that Solomon is going to use things like time and chance happens to them all. And he uses illustrations. We're going to use like a dice and an hourglass to kind of compare. He uses that idea to basically lay down, this is how wisdom works. It helps you, but it's not a foolproof plan that nothing bad ever happens. In fact, Solomon will lay it out. It is better to be wise than a fool, but ultimately you're still going to die. So just keep that in mind. And so wisdom literature is what Solomon is writing. And again, it's dealing with the messy truths of Proverbs that don't seem to be true. That's why we dealt with that idea that it's the apparent contradictions that we're looking at here. Wisdom literature is, by its very definition, proverbial. It's meant to be pithy. It's meant to be short little statements that are easy to remember. But again, they are not it's not a vending machine. If you push this button, you don't automatically get that result. It's time and chance. Wisdom helps your chances, so to speak. All right? And again, Ecclesiastes is going to show us that wisdom is a good way to hedge your bets, if you want to use that expression, but God can dispense whatever he wants, whenever he wants to. Wisdom just helps with the quality of life thing. That's the important aspect here. Again, wisdom is typically written in a poetic form. We'll spend some time going over what that means. There's chiasm and stuff we'll probably spend a whole lesson on. So it doesn't rhyme. It just repeats the same theme, or it does a point counterpoint type thing. That's the idea of Hebrew poetry. All right, Psalm 24, which we'll do in one of the side notes. You'll see me go through that passage. It's a good example of Jewish poetry. So that's Psalm 24, and we'll, like I said, you'll kind of see how Hebrew poetry works. A lot of things in the Bible, even a lot of things in our own modern language, we still pull from. But again, poetry in the Jewish sense is written in this form. It's known for its parallelism, and that parallelism can be expressed a lot of different ways. So you can have synonymous, which means a repetition of the same thought. You can have antithetic, which means a point and a counterpoint. So that's kind of this idea. Synthetic is the thought, and then let's push a little further. Now, I mentioned here the idea of what's called emblematic. It's a type of synthetic where one line will then expound on the previous line, and then and again we'll see some of those as we dig deep in the side notes. But then you also have things like the climatic, which is it repeats constantly throughout, keeps pushing a theme forward. So pay attention to those details. That's going to be how Hebrew poetry is arranged. And if you understand that, you can start interpreting it a lot better, because sometimes it will say, like, I don't understand this line. Well, read the next one. If it's antithetic, then you know, oh, I understood that point. Go back to the previous one. Oh, it's the opposite. Okay, I get it now. And it's all just the idea of helping you understand the Bible as you go through this. There's going to be a lot of wordplay. There's going to be a lot of weird little things that are thrown in. So, for instance, the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. Duh. And sometimes if you think about in our language where you have what I used to be called homonyms, but now are homophones, whatever. But if you think about that in English, you know, if you say dear and dear, you don't know which one I'm talking about, but you get that there is a wordplay going on here. The Hebrew is the same, and so you have a guy named Nabal, and he's a fool, and he's empty, and that's the word Nabal. And so Nabal and Nabal are plays, and so you get some of that as you go throughout. If you want to see that example in process, it doesn't translate into English too well, but you'll see 1 Samuel 25:25. It's the idea of foolish and wicked, and then senseless, and the two word plays because the guy was that way. And so that's how that plays out. Now we're going to take a whole lesson. We'll go over the chiasm here, but just understand that Hebrew poetry is playing on the idea of parallelism. It's playing on the idea of wordplay. It's playing on the idea of general truths, but don't take it too far, because yes, while it is a good thing, while it is best to be wise, it is not foolproof in that God is not obligated. Oh, you did that. Well, I'm guaranteed to do. No, God is still God, and he can still act in his own. That is one of the frustrations that Solomon is dealing with here. So next time we come back, we'll deal with chiasm. Pay attention for that side note that'll pop up, and that'll deal specifically with some of these parallelisms and things like that you deal with. All right, guys, I will see you next time here on the Summer of Ecclesiastes.